19 handguns. That's how many were included in Remnant 2 at launch. How do all of them hold up on Apocalypse difficulty? That's what we're here to find out. Strap in folks, this is gonna be a long one. Starting things off, we have Bolt Driver. You may be asking why I'm covering this weapon again since I talked about it in the Fusion Rifle video. I figured since the game has gotten its first DLC, and some balance changes, I'd revisit the handguns I previously went over. This is also beneficial for people tuning into this series for the first time. It would be kind of odd to the general viewer if I omitted a few weapons. Back on topic, the Bolt Driver is a charge-based burst-fire SMG, meaning you need to hold down the trigger for a moment to actually shoot. Damage-wise, it's on the higher end of the handguns. The charge time and reload speed are the most notable downsides of the weapon. Thankfully, the gun does have an open mod slot, which allows us to use overflow to help with both, although the mod damage boost issue has yet to be fixed. As for the build, I decided to run a lifesteal setup with a bit of tankiness. For my skills, I chose Death Wish from Ritualist, and Hunter's Focus from Hunter. On the trinket side, I grabbed Nightmare Spiral, Alchemy Stone, Atonement Fold, Hardcore Metal Band, and Archer's Crest. Combined together, they boost my lifesteal and give me a constant 5 bulwark stacks thanks to the synergy of Atonement Fold and Hardcore Metal Band. For the mutator, I was going to run Sequence Shot, but it's currently bugged and giving way more charge speed than intended, so I ran Supercharger. Siphoner Heart would be my choice for obvious reasons, with the fragments being crit chance, crit damage, and fire rate. For traits, I made sure to invest in Siphoner. Bolt Driver's fairly high base damage works very well in this setup. As long as you can land your shots, you'll heal a large amount of health per burst. Thankfully, bleeding doesn't affect our lifesteal, so Atonement Fold isn't hurting our gains. Overall, Bolt Driver is an excellent Apocalypse-ready handgun that you should definitely give a try. Coming up, we have the Cube Gun. This Labyrinthian gun is a very unique weapon. Its damage and weak spot bonus are on the lower end of the handguns, but it does have unlimited ammo. The gun fires projectiles that return to the magazine after hitting an enemy or surface. Hitting the reload button calls back any projectiles you may have shot too far away. The weapon also utilizes the heat mechanic. After 25 continuous shots, the gun will overheat, although this can take a bit longer, especially if you're further away from your targets. The small gap between firing and waiting for the projectiles to come back can cause the heat levels to go down. The attached mod is Cube Shield. When aiming down sights, this mod summons a giant cube around the user that will delete projectiles. This shield lasts for 15 seconds and does have an absorption limit. Pressing the mod button while the shield is deployed will send it out wherever you aim, passing slowly through enemies and dealing damage. Said damage is boosted by absorbing enemy projectiles. The obvious pro of this weapon is the unlimited ammo. Not needing to worry about ammo is huge in Apocalypse. Having a massive shield from enemy projectiles is also invaluable. The drawbacks are the projectiles themselves and the heat mechanic. Using this setup, we can make the heat mechanic trivial and keep up close to land our projectiles easier. For skills, I chose Challenger's Rampage and Gunslinger's Bulletstorm. My trinkets of choice were Gunslinger's Charm, Microcompressor, Burden of the Destroyer, Ring of Infinite Damage, and Stone of Expanse. For my mutator, I chose Ingenuity. The reload speed bonus won't really come into play here unless I royally mess up my aim. Crit chance, crit damage, and fire rate once again for my fragments. This build lets you fire well over 100 shots per magazine, and with the boosted fire rate, you can put out respectable consistent damage. On top of that, if you get into a rough spot where you know you're about to be spammed by projectiles, you can just pop the mod. One tip I can give is to try and keep the use of the weapon at close to medium range. Beyond a certain point, the gun's gonna feel like it's firing slower or even jamming. Archer's Crest can help extend its effective DPS range by speeding up their travel time. It's not as powerful as weapons that actually need ammo, but for the utility it brings to the field, I would definitely call it Apocalypse ready. Next in line is the Double Barrel. This two-shot shotgun is a powerhouse. It holds the single highest damage out of every handgun, and it shows. It can easily two-tap most basic trash mobs so long as you hit their weak spots. However, it does have a medium spread and the lowest effective range of all handguns. For one-on-one close quarters combat, this is the best handgun, hands down. Only having 2 shots does put you at a similar risk of the coach gun or even the single shot weapons. For the build, I ran a pretty funky setup. Hunter's Mark from Hunter, and Stone Skin from Alchemist were my skills of choice. My trinkets consisted of Cost of Betrayal, Point Focus Ring, Targeting Jewel, Blust Ring, and Dried Clay Ring. Cost of Betrayal is an interesting playstyle necklace. It locks your relic count to 1, and gives you a 20% total damage boost so long as you have 1 charge. When you drop to 0 charges, you instead get a 20% damage vulnerability. After 30 seconds, your charge will regenerate. Targeting Jewel and Point Focus Ring increase my effective range and reduce my spread. Blessed Ring grants 2 stacks of Bulwark after using a relic charge for 30 seconds. I was really wondering why they doubled the duration of this ring in the October patch. Now it makes sense. Dried Clay Ring grants us 1 stack of Bulwark and gives us a total damage boost of 60% of our Bulwark DR, which in this case would be 10.8% at 3 stacks. The extra Bulwark stack from Dried Clay Ring also reduces the Cost of Betrayal penalty down to just 2%. Hotshot and Extender were my choice of mod and mutator. For my relic, I picked the one choice that gives healing even while empty. The fragments I chose were damage reduction, healing effectiveness, and range damage. I also made sure to invest in triage and regrowth to improve my passive regen. Investing in handling would bring my spread reduction up to 90%. This build was a lot of fun. The spread reduction and range improvements turned this shotgun into a pocket sniper. Not needing to worry about running out of relic charges was also pretty cool. Obviously there are more efficient setups out there, but on this show, we like getting weird. I've said it once before, and I'll say it again. This weapon is apocalypse ready. Enigma is an Enigma. It's been nerfed multiple times, yet still reigns as champion for easy ad clear. The weapon fires arcs of electricity that auto-target enemies. They bounce up to an additional 2 targets within 7.5 meters, dealing 30% less damage with each jump. The initial target you hit will become overloaded, and emit a small shock blast, and an additional one 5 seconds later. Despite having a negative crit chance and no weak spot damage, the weapon still manages to output really good damage. More about that negative crit chance. I believe it only affects the first target you hit, as having at least 10 crit chance reveals that the other 2 targets can still be crit, which otherwise shouldn't happen with a negative 10 crit chance. The attached mod is Chaos Driver. This mod lets you shoot rods into the environment or enemies for 10 seconds. On the ground, rods will tether to each other with a small shock damage beam. This can hurt you, and frequently it won't make a pain notification, so do be careful. When stuck inside enemies, they receive a shock dot. Each additional rod increases the dot damage by 25%. If the first rod hit a weak spot, the damage will be considered weak spot damage. However, it must be the first one. Hitting a non-weak spot and then a weak spot after will only count as regular damage. If you tether a ground rod to one inside of an enemy, the dot damage will be increased by a multiplicative 50%. The most powerful single target application would be 6 rods in a target and then 1 on the ground nearby. You could also make a web of shock beams, which is pretty cool. The basic fire alone is enough to clear out hordes of ads. Just tap firing at a group will set off multiple overloaded blasts. The only real downsides of the weapon are the limited range and negative crit chance. So for a funny build, I decided to turn that short range beam into a long range beam. I swear I had a joke here. It was a real shocker too. Hey wait a minute! Using Ritualist and Hunter, I upped my status damage, crit chance, and range. Longshot, with Targeting Jewel and Fey Hunter Ring, let you target enemies really far away. It looks very silly. It's also very effective, and now you can easily wipe ads from even further away. For my fragments, I ran elemental damage, ammo reserves, and elemental damage resistance. And for my mutator, I ran Maelstrom since I had miasma. If you want more of a close range setup, I also threw together this one with Challenger. Swap out the range rings with Alumni Ring and Tempest Conduit. Using Kinship and an Ethereal Orb, you can actually stand inside of your tethers. This procs Tempest Conduit, which is amazing. Yeah, this weapon is really good, one of the best. But you already knew that. You also know it's apocalypse ready. Hellfire is the Spitfire from Remnant 1, with a focus on the flamethrower aspect. The primary fire is a flamethrower. It's short range, has no crit chance, and no weak spot damage bonus. The primary fire ignites enemies for 900 damage over 10 seconds, and this is actually the highest burn dot source in the game. A short puff into basic trash mobs will critically wound if not kill them. The attached mod is Explosive Shot. Returning from Remnant 1, it functions the exact same way. I kind of wish it were a free slot mod though. Almost kind of feels like they took two well-liked concepts from the first game and mashed them into one. Maybe if it did fire damage, or made targets caught in the blast more vulnerable to fire damage, then it could at least combo with the primary fire. You end up being left with a close-range flamethrower and a grenade launcher attachment that can kill you if you're too close to enemies. That being said, Explosive Shot is still good at dealing with crowds when you invest into it. If it were a fire damage based explosion, it'd be much better and require less gear splitting. The part that saddens me is that the weapon doesn't benefit from any of the range increasing sources. The same goes for Nebula. If Enigma, one of the best handguns in the game, can, why not Hellfire and Nebula? It certainly wouldn't make them too strong. Moving on to a build, I decided on one of my most bizarre setups yet. Embrace of Shahala is a ring I've always thought was too difficult to work with. You need to have a minimum of 4 statuses on you to gain lethal benefit. Before the release of the Awakened King DLC, this was even more difficult to accomplish. With the use of Atonement Fold, we can have a permanent bleed dot on ourselves. Using Hellfire and Oil Pots, we can easily ignite ourselves, and Gas Giant can corrode us. There's probably a 4th status you could apply to yourself, but I couldn't think of any at the time. How do you deal with having 3 damaging dots on your character at once? Well, thanks to Ritualist and Timekeeper's Duel, the self-inflicted dots actually use the pre-affliction bug scaling, which in this case is actually a positive, and I hope they keep it like that. Kinship reduces it even further. I've seen as low as 0.4 damage a second on the corrosive dot. It'll take some setup and maintenance, but it'll give us some good value from Embrace. For the other 2 trinkets, I grabbed Talisman of the Sun and Alchemy Stone. It's worth mentioning, I ran Hunter for Hunter's Mark and the increased range / weak spot damage. Just like Enigma, I ran Maelstrom for my mutator. For mobbing, this build was actually really fun. For bossing though, I'm just a coward and don't like going for melee strikes on bosses half the time. Like I said, it is a lot of maintenance just for 15 DR, but if you like juggling statuses, you'll probably enjoy this build. I also did a quick run with a mod damage setup using Archon and Alchemist. All base game trinkets, nothing too special. Against fodder mobs, Explosive Shot easily one-shots them. You could invest into Amplitude to widen the blast radius, but take into account the increased risk of blowing yourself up. Stone Skin on Alchemist can also reduce the knockdown to a stagger. For some tips, I'd honestly try to use this gun more as a combo weapon. Puff a target and then swap back to your long gun. Save Explosive Shot for distant groups of adds. Not at all a bad weapon. Certainly Apocalypse ready with the right playstyle. Meridian is a Dran pocket grenade launcher. It lobs out explosives in an arc that detonate on contact with targets or a few seconds after hitting the ground. The attached mod is Screamer. Instead of grenades with an arc, you'll fire straight shooting rockets. These rockets deal more damage than the grenades at the cost of having only a little over half the grenade blast size. It may seem simple, but it's a ton of fun. If you've ever played Demoman and Soldier in Team Fortress 2, you'll probably love this weapon. Without boosts, the grenades don't deal a ton of damage. They also can't hit weak spots and don't have any chance of critting. I feel like I've said that for the last 3 guns now. Just like with Explosive Shot, this weapon is definitely a close range hazard. It's very easy to blow yourself up or get staggered into an enemy if you aren't careful. For a build, I went with Alchemist Explorer, Stone Skin for obvious reasons, and Gold Digger for the assorted buffs. For trinkets, I ran Detonation Trigger, Blast Cap Ring, Gambler, Destroyer, and Archer's Crest. Archer's Crest is a nice quality of life ring for the weapon, but by no means necessary. I just like going for long shots. I did grab Longshot to counteract the range lost from Burden of the Destroyer. The fragments were as you would expect, and my mutator of choice was bottom heavy. The faster I empty the magazine, the better. As I predicted, this was a fun as hell build. Meridian is seriously one of my favorite secondaries. Both parts of the weapon benefiting from explosive scaling makes it easy to build for. Hellfire, take some notes, even Nebula got that part right. The tips I gave for Explosive Shot on Hellfire apply here too. If you're having a hard time landing shots, I do recommend running Archer's Crest. The projectile speed boost does help out a good bit. Definitely Apocalypse ready. Ah, an old classic. The MP60R, or the SMG as it was called in the first game, makes its return to Remnant 2 with a few changes. The following are buffs from the original iteration. The damage was increased from 21 to 27, magazine size from 40 to 42, ideal range from 13 meters to 17 meters, and critical chance from 5% to 10%. For nerfs, the rate of fire was reduced from 16 to 14.2, and max ammo from 280 to 252. Overall, it's a net positive for the weapon. Like most of the returning guns, it feels exactly the same gunplay-wise as the original. To save you from having to hear that 4 more times, the remaining returning weapons also have this trait. The upsides of this gun are its high rate of fire and its decent magazine size. This weapon and the Tech 22, which we'll cover later, serve similar purposes in different ways. The downsides of the MP60 are the recoil and spread. While the weapon may have 17 meters of range, the spread widens a good amount as you fire. This results in a lot of missed shots on medium to long-range targets. Hell, even at close range it can hurt. Even firing in bursts doesn't help much. I call this build the Call of Duty player. Gunslinger for Bulletstorm, and Handler for Support Dog. On the trinket side we have Gunslinger's Charm, Ring of the Vein, Focusing Shard, Ring of Infinite Damage, and Fey Hunter Ring. Ring of the Vein improves our movement speed while aiming at the cost of iframes when dodging and sliding. Combined with the footwork trait, we move really fast when ADSing. This lets us sidestep some attacks more easily, giving us more time for Focusing Shard to kick in. My fragment picks were weapon spread, recoil, and fire rate. My mod and mutator choices were Soulbinder and bottom heavy. Put together, this setup lets us move and shoot at incredible speeds. It's kinda hilarious to watch. You pretty much laser off enemies' heads in the case of the Dran. The biggest downside, besides having less iframes on our evasions, is how fast we blow through ammo. If we ran Hunter instead of Handler, we could have squeezed out more damage per bullet and been more efficient. I ended up swapping out Fey Hunter Ring for Burden of the Destroyer and replacing Handler with Challenger for the last boss in my recording. With Rampage, you can definitely feel how much more damage you're putting out. For some tips, if you aren't going to invest into recoil reduction, get some practice with manually controlling it. And if you stack rate of fire buffs, prepare to have no ammo ever, because you will absolutely just blast through it. So yeah, the weapon is apocalypse ready, as it was in the first game. Next up is Nebula. This corrosive flavored flamethrower is the Nerude version of Hellfire. It shares a lot of similarities with it. Same short range, lack of crit chance, and weak spot damage bonus. The mod with this weapon, however, is Nanoswarm, or Swarm for those who played the first game. Swarm in Remnant 1 was an awesome slottable mod, and in this game it functions the exact same way. For 15 seconds, they'll auto-target any enemy within 20 meters of you, dealing corrosive damage on hit. These little guys can crit and even hit weak spots. Since they also scale off corrosive damage, it's easier to build for than Hellfire's explosive shot. Plus you can just pop the mod and swap to something else if you want. I find Corroded to be slightly more helpful than Burning in most cases, since it does increase the total damage a target takes by an additional 10%. And since Nebula's dot lasts longer than Hellfire's, this is even more apparent. There is also one lost mechanic to Nebula. Corroded targets killed by Nebula spawn a gas cloud that lasts 2 seconds. Enemies that touch the cloud will receive the full dot of the primary fire. These clouds can be maintained by spraying them. The weapon description says it refreshes the timer, but I think it more likely extends the timer. I could definitely stop spraying them for 2 seconds, and they would go on long after. Also, sometimes I would spray into them and they would just go away. The visual of the cloud might linger for half a second or so after it actually stops. While it's a cool gimmick, I didn't find it to be super impactful most of the time. I assume in siege events this is probably a more desirable trait. Maybe if Amplitude affected it, it would be more noticeable? For my build, I went with Archon Summoner. I decided on focusing on the Swarm aspect of the gun. Using Havoc Form and Root Hollows, my goal was to pop Swarm, and then use my other damage sources. Honestly, this build was just an excuse to use Havoc Form in one of these videos. Using the combination of Lamir Sensor, Zoe's Ring, Acid Stone, Alumni Ring, and Burden of the Warlock, I extended my mod duration, elemental damage, and cheapened my mod cost. For my fragments, I ran mod cost, mod duration, and mod damage. Although in retrospect, that last one should have been elemental damage. I ran Maelstrom as my mutator for the level 10 effect. I wanted to have Swarm up as often as possible. And Spore Shot on Spore Bloom could help proc Archon's Prime perk pretty much whenever. Combined, Havoc Form and Swarm really put out some good damage. Affliction matches the corroded dot duration with Havoc form, which reduces the management aspect of the build. I'm still not great at using Havoc form, as you can tell. It's probably my least used skill in the game. I'm sure someone with better experience could get even better value out of this build. What if you wanted to focus on the primary fire? This build, using Ritualist and Challenger, help boost the dot damage and crit chance of the gun and mod. The trinkets here being Effluvium Enhancer, Akari Warband, Ahana Crystal, Burden of the Gambler, and Timekeeper's Jewel. We are losing out on Swarm being able to weak spot hit, but the gains to crit chance and damage are worth it for the primary fire. My mutator this time was Fetid Wounds. Crit hits applying double corroded dots is pretty good. And Miasma lets us get the full 15% crit chance. The usual crit chance and damage fragments were there, and this time I remembered to equip the elemental damage one. This was surprisingly effective. I'd go as far as calling it a dopamine generator. Seeing all the yellow numbers from Swarm and the primary fire makes my brain feel really good. The limited range of it can still be a pain to work with, but when you actually can reach them, it's really fun. Were this a tier list, I would put Nebula above Hellfire. Maybe I'll make one after the series is finished. Ready for Apocalypse. The Repeater Pistol. The OG starting pistol from the first game. It hardly needs an introduction, although in Remnant 2, where there are several starting pistols, I might as well. This scrappy Mouser-inspired pistol is a semi-automatic pea shooter. It has received a few stat tweaks in the jump from the original. The buffs being a small boost to its fire rate, 2 extra magazines of total ammo, and a 5% weak spot damage bonus. The only nerf it's received is in the damage department. It's essentially a 12% decrease in damage. With the extra ammo and bonus weak spot damage, it's not really that bad, although it is still on the lower end of handguns in terms of damage. One thing I neglected to mention in my video of these semi-automatic rifles was that Remnant 2 now has an input buffer. In the first game, if you wanted to get the best fire rate out of semi-auto guns, you had to know the exact timing for when to shoot to not have your inputs wasted. The hunting rifle and repeater pistol were prime examples of weapons that were affected by it. This is gone in Remnant 2. You can mash the fire button as fast as you please. As for pros and cons, it's very middle of the road. It's neither terrible nor amazing. Out of all the handguns, I'd say it's probably the least desirable, especially with some of the other handguns coming up. I still really like it though. For a build, I wanted to try a Grey Health setup. My archetypes and skills were Bulletstorm with Gunslinger and Reboot with Invader. The trinkets I picked were Effigy Pendant, Bitter Memento, Ring of the Damned, Painless Obsidian, and Xania's Malice. Together, these boost my damage, defense, and action speed so long as I have Grey Health. You could run Atonement Fold if you really wanted. It pretty much does the same thing as Bitter Memento, but also gives you crit chance, though you will have your healing cut in half. On the mod and mutator side, I ran Corrosive Rounds and Momentum, and you already know what the fragments are going to be. Gotta be honest, I'm running out of ways to call these builds fun. How many more of these are there? Oh my god, I'm only halfway through. I will say, this Grey Health setup worked pretty well. And with Corrosive Rounds and Momentum, I was occasionally hitting weak spots in the 500s. Bulletstorm making the gun automatic also produces a very satisfying sound. In the first game, this was hard to do, but in Remnant 2, it's as simple as pressing a key. I'd say it's Apocalypse ready. A Rune Pistol is an interesting Fey handgun. It fires in 3-round bursts and has the same damage as the Repeater Pistol, although this one has a much higher magazine size, 10% crit chance, but no weak spot bonus. The spread starts off small, but does increase in size the more you fire. The recoil isn't too bad though. The attached mod here is Soulbrand. Now, had this video come out before it was changed, I consider this weapon far worse. But since its update, the effect is actually pretty good in a team setting. Upon activation, and for 25 seconds after, enemies within 25 meters of you will become branded. This means enemies just entering after mod activation will also become branded. Enemies killed while branded will drop echoes for 10 seconds that when picked up heal targets for 20% of their max health. They have a 3-meter radius for being absorbed. It mentions them being survivors. What that means is only players can pick them up. You don't have to worry about your summons or dogs snatching your heals, which is kind of a shame if you did want them to benefit from it. Imagine you're just doing your own thing, and your root hollows go out and get into some scuffles. It'd be kind of cool if they could heal off of them and keep on fighting, but that could result in them stealing them from you when you actually wanted to pick them up, and I think that's fine. Players can pick them up and that's all that matters. A very nice support mod. For a build, I opted to run Medic Summoner, with Healing Shield and Reaver for my skills. For trinkets, I used Difference Engine, Burden of the Divine, Propulsion Loop, Compulsion Loop, and Generating Band. I wanted to show off the healing Soul Brand could do. For the Mutator, I ran Spirit Healer for even more healing to myself and allies on mod activation. For Fragments, I ran Healing Effectiveness, Mod Cost, and Mod Duration. I believe the weapon shines the best in situations where there are a lot of enemies constantly. In some boss fights this can work, but in a lot of them, the adds don't spawn fast enough to make use of the effect's potential. If you're playing solo, this fact is even more prevalent. The best you can do is hold off on using the mod until a batch of ads spawn, and then use it to get a good chunk of your health back. Not useless in those situations, but definitely squandering the mod's potential. In siege events and general mobbing, you can activate it and pretty much have your friends covered. They can kill things and have little healing orbs to patch them up. I didn't mention it before, but definitely invest into Resonance. It increases the radius at which enemies can be branded, up to 37.5 meters. That is a huge area. No doubt it's apocalypse ready. Rupture Cannon is a semi-auto pocket shotgun pistol. It deals a comparatively higher damage among the other handguns, but much less than the double barrel. It also has the highest base fire rate out of all the shotgun type weapons. The recoil is fairly heavy though, not sure how I didn't bring that up in the shotguns video. The reload speed is a bit slow, but that recoil can genuinely throw off your aim if you stack rate of fire buffs. If you do land your shots though, it can put out some good damage, and with the spread being as small as it is, you don't need a ton of reduction sources to make it great. Hunter for Hunter's Focus, Alchemist for Stone Skin. For trinkets, I ran Gunfire Security Lanyard, Stone of Expanse, Burden of the Departed, Burden of the Stargazer, and Anastasia's Inspiration. For my Mutator and mod, I used Extender and Overflow. For my fragments, I used Skill Duration, Cooldown, and Weak Spot Damage. Extender and Gunfire Lanyard lets you fire over 20 times per magazine. It lets you really get value out of Hunter's Focus. Not only do you deal really good damage per shot, you also won't get whiplash when firing the weapon. A very fun build, and a very apocalypse ready weapon. I am including this for the sake of not leaving out any weapon. This is the one and only handgun that is an objective terrible weapon, and that's because it's designed to be that way. Just like with the rusty lever action, it's a tutorial gun. No mod slot, no mutator slot, no crit chance, and no weak spot damage bonus. The only benefits of using this over the standard variant is that you get 2 extra clips of ammo, and the max fall-off range is a little bit better. Even then, you won't be using it for long. You be the judge if this gun is apocalypse ready. The Service Pistol is one of my favorite handguns. Not only is it good with damage, it also has a really good fire rate. The biggest downside is the mag size. It can pretty much do what the Repeater Pistol can in a smaller time frame. There is slightly more risk than with the Repeater Pistol since you have less shots, but once you get the hang of aiming it, it's honestly way better. In a way, the Repeater Pistol is sort of like training wheels for the Service Pistol, and because of that, I don't really have any more to say about it. It's just a good pistol. For a build, I went with Alchemist Challenger. One for Elixir of Life, the other for Rampage. My trinkets included Death's Embrace, Restriction Cord, Reserve Boosting Gem, Ring of Grace, and Dread Font. Extender and Overflow were my choice of mutator and mod. I used Tranquil Heart with max health, weak spot damage, and damage reduction fragments. You can tell I was going for a half-health tank build. Since the weapon is already so good, I figured why not make a build that lets me safely use it without needing to stop firing. And the build was exactly that. It's almost comical how much I could face tank and still bounce back. Look how hard the Red Prince is trying to kill me, and I'm just sitting there, shooting back without a care in the world. Of course the weapon is apocalypse ready. It's basically the Repeater but better. The Silverback is the Revolver from Remnant 1 returned with a few changes. These include a huge buff to its fire rate, 2 more meters of range, 2 more cylinders of ammo, and a 5% weak spot damage bonus. The only nerf the weapon received was to its cylinder size. This 6-shooter only holds 5 rounds now. A bit strange, but the other changes are quite good. It does have a bit of kick to its recoil, but the fire rate is still slow enough to the point where it's not unwieldy. It's a weapon that rewards precision aim. at least on smaller targets. On larger ones, you can go buck wild and spray. The biggest downside besides the small cylinder size is the reload. Like Fort Scattergun and Wrangler, it loads bullets one by one. This causes reloads to take a bit, but it also allows you to stop mid-reload and pop off a quick shot. For the build, I went with Gunslinger for a quick draw and Hunter for Hunter's Focus. Yeah, I know it's Gunslinger Hunter. I'm currently on build 13 of 18 in this video. I think I'm going a little bit crazy at this point. The trinkets I ran were Void Idol, Ring of Restocking, Outcast Ring, Xania's Malice, and Ring of Flawed Beauty. Corrosive Rounds and Deadly Calm filled their respective slots. And the fragments were supposed to be the typical crit setup, but I accidentally equipped range damage instead. Oops. Now I suck at landing consistent weak spot hits, but when you do land them with this setup, you can hit nearly 2k damage on a weak spot crit. And those moments where you can fire off all 5 rounds into a weak spot, mwah, beautiful. One tip I can give is to try and utilize instant reload sources like the Elemental Bullet mods and Gunslinger's Prime perk. Absolutely apocalypse ready. Sorrow is a hand crossbow that is deceptively powerful. When I first used the weapon months ago, I wasn't fully convinced of its strength. I thought it was trying to be like Twin Shot from Remnant 1, but with a built-in mod. I'm happy to say it's actually very strong. The primary fire shoots crossbow bolts that stay lodged in enemies and the environment for about 10 seconds. Its mod, Eulogy, recalls any bolt stuck in enemies or the world back to the user. This deals 90 damage per bolt in said enemy, and to any target they pass through on the way back. The mod also reloads Sorrow, and the reclaimed bolts are added to your magazine, potentially doubling its size. Any extra beyond 5 are returned to your reserves. You essentially have unlimited ammo if you can charge Eulogy fast enough. And on top of all that, each bolt returned heals you for 2% of your max health. A mod that actually synergizes with the base gun and doesn't need mod scaling to be good? Holy shit, miracles do happen. For a build, I did end up using Archon, although the mod is good enough that you can totally use Sorrow in whatever playstyle you want. Chaos Gate and Alchemist's Frenzy Dust being my skills. My choice of trinkets were Nightweaver's Grudge, Probability Cord, Atonement Fold, Ring of Infinite Damage, and Shard Banded Ring. For the Mutator, I honestly found Bullet Weaver to be a perfect fit. 20% is a huge fire rate boost, and the extra mod generation helps build Eulogy even faster. I gotta say, this was insanely powerful. Cancer is one of my least favorite bosses to fight, and this build just brute forced its way through it. The constant healing from Eulogy and my investment into Siphoner worked wonders for topping me off from chip damage. I only used 1 relic charge the entire fight. That's how strong it is. I was genuinely astonished by how good this gun was. If I were making a tier list, this thing would go in S tier. I implore you to give it a try if you haven't yet. 100% apocalypse ready. Sureshot is a Meridian explosive pistol. It fires a projectile that explodes on contact. This mini explosion has no damage falloff, which is nice. The direct damage is 66, and the following blast deals 60. Its mod is Big Bang. It holds up to 5 charges and launches a fast-moving explosive. The damage of said explosion is based on how many charges were consumed when firing it. It has a 5-meter radius, so be careful using it too close. Even with kinship, it can very easily wound you, if not outright kill you. With nothing else buffing it, the damage is pretty good. A fully charged shot will vaporize any trash mob, and anything that survives will suffer a heavy burn dot. The biggest issue with the weapon, besides the hazard it poses to the player and their teammates, is the mod cost. Each charge needs 630 mod power. With nothing boosting mod power, this takes ages to build up, so the most obvious route to go would be an Archon build. Chaos Gate and Miasma from Ritualist, Detonation Trigger, Dreadfont, Burden of the Follower, White Pawn Stamp, and Burden of the Warlock. My Mutator was Feedback, and I ran Reprocessed Heart with mod cost, mod damage, and elemental damage fragments. The goal was to recharge Big Bang as fast as possible. Maybe don't run Amplitude with this setup like I did. I was already losing a bit of health on mod activation from Warlock, and getting hit by the blast even with kinship wasn't helping. But when you get into the flow, you deal big chunks of damage to bosses' health bars consistently. For fun, I did another build focusing on the basic fire, Bulletstorm and Miasma from Gunslinger and Ritualist respectively, Detonation Trigger, Timekeeper's Jewel, Ahane Crystal, Red Ring of Death, and Singed Ring. My Mutator for this setup was Bandit. Bandit, on this weapon, similar to Pride or Hive Cannon from Remnant 1, can proc on the direct hit and explosive from the primary fire. I've gotten as many as 41 shots before in one mag. The double chance to proc is so good, especially since Bandit gives a rate of fire boost on activation. You can just keep firing and firing. I sparingly used Big Bang with this setup. The basic fire alone is much safer. I am completely out of ways to say something is apocalypse ready. Sureshot is the hunting pistol from the first game. Here's the changes from the original. 2 buffs, 2 nerfs, faster rate of fire, although that's only going to matter in a bandit or bottom feeder build, and 2 extra shots. The 2 nerfs are a lot more drastic. The weak spot damage bonus was reduced from 20% to 10%, and the crit chance from 15% to 5%. Despite the nerfs, the weapon is still solid for one-shot risky playstyles. 2 weak spot hits will drop most trash mobs. The same pros and cons of the Widowmaker apply here as well. You shoot, and you either hit or miss. Can you tell I'm running out of energy? I was going to do a Sidewinder setup with the Widowmaker, but that felt like the easy option. Instead I opted for a Hunter Shroud Wormhole build, using Legacy Protocol, Burden of the Rebel, Burden of the Stargazer, Black Pawn Stamp, and Xania's Malice. Along with the typical fragments, I wanted my skills to come back as soon as possible. With this setup, I could get Wormhole back once every 7 seconds. The only issue is that Stargazer would eat up my health very quickly. Thankfully, Voidheart provides a full heal after a few seconds. This was a very strong build. Each Wormhole Shroud shot deals incredible damage, although I kept forgetting to heal. Part of me forgot I was running Stargazer and got really confused whenever I would die. Like, bro, just look at the bottom of the screen. That's why you're dying. The hunting pistol was amazing in the first game, and Sureshot continues its legacy. The Tech-22 is the machine pistol from the first game Reborn. It's gotten a slew of changes from its original design. Starting with buffs, the magazine size has been increased by 6, the total ammo was increased from 240 to 270, the crit chance was raised from 5% to 10%, and the weak spot damage bonus was increased from 75% to 100%. That last one kinda shocked me. I don't know if I ever realized the machine pistol had below 100% weak spot damage bonus in the first game. Either way, that's a massive buff. Moving on to the nerfs, its fire rate was reduced from 18 to 16 RPS, and its ideal range was reduced from 18 meters to 15 meters. Overall, a pretty net positive set of changes. Compared to the MP60, it's pretty much a statistical downgrade. However, just like in the first game, the machine pistol is all about control. The MP60's spread and recoil make it difficult to focus fire the longer the trigger is held. The Tech-22 has a much smaller increase in spread by comparison. Honestly, I'd say it's a matter of preference which one you should use. For what it's worth, the Tech-22 is silenced, whereas the MP60 isn't. Not that it matters a whole ton. I ended up using another Grey Health build, but this time, I went even further. I actually invested into the meme trait Dark Pact. That's how serious I was. Hunter Medic was my combo, with Mark and Shield being my skills. The Medic skill didn't really matter, as I was mostly just running it for the third perk. Effigy Pendant, Ring of the Damned, Ring of Deflection, Painless Obsidian, and Ring of Retribution were my trinkets. If I ever got hit, I wanted to keep as much Grey Health as possible, and that's why I ran Shielded Heart with crit and Grey Health fragments. My mod and mutator were Hotshot and Dreadful. Dreadful is a very difficult mutator to work with. To gain the max benefit, you need at least half of your health to be Grey. Your options for getting there are Atonement Fold and the Jerky consumable. Reprocessed Heart requires you to use a Relic charge, and the effect can't be cancelled by unequipping it. Unfortunately, nothing sets your Grey Health to half immediately, presumably so that Necklace of Flowing Life wouldn't be too strong with it. So that means we need to use either of the mentioned sources and just wait. You could also just get hit by an attack and you'd probably be below half health. But unless you specifically run Flowing Life, you're going to lose out on a lot of Grey Health. And maybe Broken Heart could convert health above half into Grey Health? It'd still be a large chunk of mod power to Flowing Life, but you can only do that multiple times with the relic if you utilize other ways of healing, such as medic skills, elixir of life, lifesteal sources. Okay, maybe there are a lot of ways of getting back up to max health. It would be kinda just nice to have a way of getting half of your health equally as Grey Health. So how did the build go? Well, when I wasn't getting my ass kicked, it was decent. Not amazing. Dreadful should probably give more damage, and a more unique level 10 effect wouldn't hurt. Still, the weapon was able to pull through despite the bizarre build I was trying to run. My calculations read that the weapon is apocalypse ready. Finally, the Western Classic. This actual 6-shooter is a very comfy handgun. It sits between the Service Pistol and Silverback in terms of playstyle. 6 high-damaging shots with a full-cylinder reload. The weapon feels slippery, but in a good way. It's kinda hard to describe. Its rate of fire is double the speed of the Silverback, but the spread suffers pretty harshly from fanning the hammer. In close to medium range, this won't matter too much, and leveling handling is usually more than enough to tighten the spread. For my last build, I wanted to do something really funny. Gunslinger, Engineer. If you think about it, Quick Draw is basically just using the Western Classic. Index of the Scribe, Crimson Dreamstone, Burden of the Rebel, Xania's Malice, and Black Pawn Stamp boost our skill weak spot damage by a huge amount. Diverting Heart with skill cooldown, skill damage, and casting speed fragments let us quick draw a lot. My mod and mutator picks were Overflow and Fetid Wounds. The guaranteed crits from quick draw let you build up Crimson Dreamstone really fast, and that charged single shot does some really good damage. Gunslinger's Prime perk lets us fan the hammer on the gun with unlimited ammo reserves for a few seconds. Overflow lets us get even more value from it. I was gonna write a joke here about being the truest cowboy you can be, but my enthusiasm is just non-existent.
The gun is apocalypse ready.
Page 33 of my script, and I'm pretty sure this is the longest I've ever written one for a video. How was the runtime for this one? Did it feel too long? Would you have rather had separate videos instead? Depending on how reception of this one is, I might go back to doing just separated videos. If people like these sort of longer ones, I'm totally fine doing that as well. Just let me in the comments know what you would prefer for the future. Shorter separated videos or big longer ones. Obviously these longer ones take a bit more time for me to get done, but just let me know. My next video will probably be the hardcore guide. Been meaning to make that one for a while now. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.